And we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Common Censored. Thanks for being here. I am joined by Eleanor Goldfield. For those of you listening on the podcast, she waved silently. She likes to mime things for the podcast
but
listeners.
That was the point. It was supposed to be a pregnant pause.
You hate the
so that
podcast
people
listeners?
listening to the podcast wouldn't know if I was here until I spoke later on. But now you ruined it.
I think it was more of an aborted pregnant pause. But for those of you listening on the live stream, she just gave me a look. All right, so we have many stories for you. Thanks for joining us. Please click thumbs up, leave a comment, say hello to folks, say hello to the community. Thanks for being here. We really do appreciate it. We have several stories, like you saw in the title. There's apologies coming out of one of our largest cities for medical testing on inmates. We'll be getting to that in a minute. The latest fucking amazingly hypocritical, hysterical, all of the words thing that Joe Biden just did. We've got a story on a death row inmate that definitely should not be there. And we'll have other stories as well, but just to list one more that we're getting to. The missile that hit Poland that could have sparked off World War III if Russia had bombed, if it meant that Russia had bombed a NATO country. For those of you who heard that story, you might have thought, this sounds probably not true. And sure enough, we now have the proof. Not true. But we'll be getting to that as well. So to start out, we are starting in the great state of brotherly love.
City.
City.
It's not a state of brotherly love at all.
State in terms of feeling.
A state of mind, you mean?
Yes.
An emotional state?
Emotional state of brotherly love.
Yeah. So I have to admit, when one of these things...
Keep going. I just can't find it. Just keep talking.
When one of these events happens, when there's like a public apology, you can almost be assured that whatever happened was so atrocious that an apology is a laughable reaction to the initial horror that took place. And this is no different. So, Philadelphia apologizes for decades of medical experiments on Black inmates that involved a component of Agent Orange. Wow.
Agent Orange?
But that's not all. So,
and I don't want to jump the gun, but we do have to explain to some people what Agent Orange is.
Well, you can, it's a chemical weapon, basically.
Chemical weapon used in Vietnam. We claimed it was just an herbicide, so all it was going to do was kill the plants, which is horrific enough. We were like, we don't like fighting in jungles, so we're going to drop this thing made by Monsanto all over the place to kill all the plants. Of course, big surprise, this thing is also heavily carcinogenic and has for years has caused generations has caused people, not just Vietnamese, which is horrific enough, but also American soldiers that were over there have died from things like lymphoma and other things.
And there are children still born that have extreme birth defects, such as no arms or legs, or face. My gosh, my brain is like
face blindness.
No,
they can't recognize people very well.
I'm having brain blindness right now.
Facial deformities,
all kinds of physical and mental deformities, thanks to Agent Orange. So this is still being felt in Vietnam today. And a component of Agent Orange was used here at home, back on the home front, which there's a bit of a tangent here that we can go on, but I'll just briefly mention it. Imperialism is a home game as well as an away game, to use the parlance of baseball. It is never something that just happens to other people. And I think it's really important to recognize that, so that we understand how important anti-imperialism is for our agendas, for our perspectives on the world, the lens with which we look at issues. it is so important because, I mean, it's important because it happens to other people in our name, but also because it happens to us as Americans and the most vulnerable Americans, which very often are Black and brown folks and Indigenous folks. And in this case, it's predominantly Black inmates in Philadelphia. So this happened from the 1950s through the 1970s. Basically, what happened was University of Pennsylvania researcher Dr. Albert Kligman conducted dermatological, biochemical, and pharmaceutical experiments that intentionally exposed about 300 inmates to viruses, fungus, asbestos, and chemical agents, including dioxin, which is a component of Agent Orange. So it's not just Agent Orange, which would be fucking horrific enough. It's also viruses, fungus, asbestos, things that we are very well aware of that are detrimental to people's health. And this is reminiscent of what happened in concentration camps in World War II. People might be familiar with the name Dr. Mengele, who did all kinds of fucking experiments on people in the concentration camps.
I like that we still use the honorific doctor. Well, he did go through medical school. All right, let's give the guy the respect he deserves.
That's true. Like, would you call him like Mr. Hitler? I guess you would know. That's true.
I believe it was Hitler Esquire. Adolf Hitler Esquire.
That's a good point, Lee. Fuck them. Fuck this Kligman.
Listen, he did not study that hard for 7 straight years to be called Mr. Mengele.
But this is the same concept, right? You basically you test whatever the fuck you want, things that you know are dangerous to humans. You test them on the humans that are quote unquote disposable in the mind of the system, in this case Black inmates. And the report goes on to mention that a lot of these inmates were just awaiting trial, were trying to save money for bail, and many were illiterate. So these are like the most vulnerable. These are poor Black people in Philadelphia, poor Black men in this case in Philadelphia, who were literally captive and had nowhere else. They had no choice in the matter.
And I would also imagine, at least in all the instances of similar things that I've read, like the testing of MK Ultra on inmates, they are not fully informed on what's going on. So you can be just guaranteed that they were told it's not harmful or whatever.
Well, I'm assuming that they're mentioning, I don't know this, but I'm assuming they're mentioning that they were illiterate because there was possibly some piece of paper that was shown to them like, oh, here's what it is. And
right.
Of course, if you can't read, then what the fuck is what the fuck good is a piece of paper that explains the potential hazards of this if they were even that honest about it?
Yes, and Daniel in the comment section brings up one of the most famous experiments done on Black people in America, or the Tuskegee experimentation with syphilis, I believe.
Mm-hmm. So somebody said what happened, and I guess you're asking about the inmates. There isn't a lot of information specifically about the inmates here, but it says that they would go on to have lifelong scars and health issues from the experiments, which I guess is not surprising if you're giving them fucking Agent Orange and fungus and viruses. And actually it says that in 2000, this is a kicker, right? This is where the apology really feels strongest. A group of inmates filed a lawsuit against the university and Kligman in 2000, but it was thrown out because of the statute of limitations. So, riddle me this, Philadelphia. What the fuck good is your apology when people tried to seek out a basic form of justice in terms of our courts,
right,
for poisoning people who were in cages against their will, against their knowledge, but that wouldn't go through because it was too late. And somehow your apology is going to smooth over all of that? Are you fucking kidding me? Like, this is so America, right? Like, I'm sorry. It's really, you know what? That was our bad. Sorry about that. But you know what? Let's move on. Let's let bygones be bygones. And why don't you just get over it?
But at least we get a sorry, you know?
Right?
That really, I think that pretty much does it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel better. Don't you?
Yeah, white
Me,
America.
a totally unaffected human being.
White
with this whole
America.
situation.
White America feels much better. We said sorry to those folks. They should stop complaining about it.
But again, I wanted to share this story, because of the story itself, but also because of these connections, the connections with imperialism, the connections with fascism, to recognize that the US is a thoroughly fascist state and has been basically since its founding, even though fascism wasn't really an ideology at that point.
Can I just throw in here, and to link that directly to these Black prisoners, many of them, as happens today, are truly innocent of anything, or they're guilty of some crime that was made up just to arrest Black people, like loitering or whatever the fuck. So yeah, it is fascism.
But I would also point out that it doesn't matter what the fuck they did. Like you could have the same experiment on death row where it's only murderers. I would feel this. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily feel the same, but it's still horrific. I don't give a shit what these people did. That is, to me, that is like completely pointless.
Okay, easy. I'm not completely pointless. The reason I said it was well, yeah, you're saying what I said was completely pointless. The reason
the point is pointless.
Thank you. Okay, now I feel great. That was a Philadelphia apology right there.
I didn't apologize.
The reason I said it was because I was just clarifying fascism and linking it back to these Black prisoners. I wasn't saying that that's the reason this matters. Anyway,
okay.
Go ahead.
All right, that's fair.
What he just said is completely pointless. Now I'm gonna keep talking.
Well, to be fair, you interrupted me. So I think those links are important. And in fact, if you look at where Hitler got a lot of his ideas, he got a lot of his ideas on how the US treats and treated at that point Blacks and Indigenous people. He loved that work. Yeah, like I love the work here. I love your work. It's beautiful. That was Hitler.
Oh my God! And
looking at the U.S.
and not just the way the U.S. treats Black people, but also the way the U.S. exploits workers, exploits average people.
Mm-hmm.
He notoriously or infamously had a life-size painting of Henry Ford in his Munich office. He was a big fan of Henry Ford. Ford continued to do business with the Nazis throughout World War II. You can read descriptions of U.S. soldiers going to liberate Germany, defeating Germany, and they're finding that the Germans are in Ford vehicles, as are they. And they go, what the fuck is that? Well, there you go.
Which I just, I don't know that I have a life. I don't know that I ever, even at like the height of.
Don't tell me what I just said was completely pointless.
No, it wasn't. I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, like a life-size portrait. Now, maybe I had an almost life-size like picture of Slash in my room.
Of Slash.
Because I mean,
why not?
Really,
Hitler got a lot of his ideas from Slash as well.
But like. Even then, it wasn't truly like. So I'm just saying, like,
no, but
you
my
have to
fascination
really be like into someone to have like a life-size
portrait of them. True,
them.
But my fascination with the life-size portrait detail, which I read in a thing about how Ford was, part of Nazi Germany and everything. It's like, wow, yeah, he's really into it. And you kind of go, oh, that's creepy. Like anytime someone goes, dude, he's got a fucking life-size portrait of fill in blank. It's like, oh, that's creepy. Wouldn't it be creepier if it was like, dude, that guy has a thimble-sized portrait of Henry Ford on his desk? Dude, did you know he has a portrait of you that is this big? That would scare the fuck out of me. That's scarier, in my opinion.
Just because it took someone that much longer to make it to do like all the details? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, and just who does that? Who has a portrait of someone this big? It's creepy.
I don't know, but people there are collectors who collect like little tiny things,
Thank you, Yonina, for the donation. That's impressive. And she's saying to the daughter of a Vietnam vet, he was told he was sterile. I have issues with obesity and fertility. I'm 35 years old. I have a Bible study sister who suffered from endometriosis
Yeah.
since age 12.
Mm.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like the shit that came out of Agent Orange and other god awful stuff that went on with Vietnam, with the Vietnam War.
War sucks indeed.
Or as Vietnam calls it, turns out they don't call it the Vietnam War. They call it the War
of
American aggression.
Which I feel like is just all the wars.
That's
now.
true. That's all the wars. But anyway.
But yeah, so again, I just wanted to
raise your hand in the comment section if right now was the moment you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. They wouldn't call it the Vietnam War. Because in their opinion, it was people coming to their fucking country. And anyway, go ahead.
Again, I doubt they call it the Iraq War in Iraq.
Yeah, well, I don't know what they call it.
The War of American aggression. Like this is.
I don't know. I don't
copy,
know.
Paste,
I don't know.
Copy paste. Copy paste. Copy paste. I'm just saying. Okay, so yeah, just wanted to make those connections and share this story. And fuck you, Philadelphia, for this bullshit apology. I think this is a very good time to highlight the ongoing need for reparations, and that reparations, as many rad and powerful Black organizers and leaders have pointed out, it's not just about slavery. It is about the ongoing oppression of Black people in the United States that goes up until today. This just ended. They just stopped using Agent Orange on Black inmates in the 70s. Like, what the fuck?
It's so crazy. Every time you read one of these stories, you go, oh, this must have ended in the 40s. And it's like still going on.
So yes, this is another good point to highlight the need for that conversation to be had legitimately and continuously because of these bullshit apologies.
So moving on, Joe Biden has done something wonderful, as he does. And for those of you new to our show, we defend neither party. We think they are, or not think, we know they are both fucking capitalist corporate shitbags that are destroying roughly reality. I don't want to, keep it to any area of the country or the world. So I'm going to just say destroying reality. So anyway, this is latest from Joe Biden, especially now that the election's over and he doesn't really care about pretending to give a shit about anybody. The Biden administration has declared Saudi Arabia's crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, should be shielded from lawsuits for his role in the killing of a U.S.-based journalist, Jamal Khashoggi. That's a big contrast with President Biden's campaign trail denunciations of the prince.
I'm shocked.
Now, I'm going to, in the comment section, please, again, raise your hand if you thought Joe Biden was going to keep his campaign promises. I mean, this shit is, but this is particularly incredible. And I'm going to get to the deeper aspect that I think a lot of other people who are covering this probably are not mentioning. But this is particularly disgusting because this is a Washington Post journalist. So this isn't even like some indie outlet that they don't give a fuck about. This isn't Julian Assange that they clearly or don't give a fuck about because they're persecuting him and imprisoning him and torturing him. This is a Washington Post journalist.
And the Washington Post is that's a, what do you call them? Stenographers for the State Department? Yes,
stenographers for the State Department. And he goes to the embassy in Turkey and they proceed to chop him up and put him in a barbecue pit. And it was directly, they now pretty much know it was directly.
I think you should clarify that you're not kidding.
Oh, no, I'm not kidding. Yeah.
Like, because it sounds almost like a hyperbolic joke. Oh, they chopped him up and threw it. Like, no, really.
Right. Like someone really railed against Trump and they were like, hey, chopped him up and threw him in a barbecue pit. Yeah, no, they literally chopped him up and threw him in a barbecue pit. And they now basically know that this was ordered at the top level, which is the Saudi crown prince. So this is particularly horrific. And here's Joe Biden saying this man who did this should be shielded from any kind of civil prosecution where he would owe money. By the way, whatever they could come up with, let's say they said, oh, he owes $1 billion to the family, like $1 billion with a B. There would still be nothing to him, but the point of it would be too much for him to handle. But here's the deeper reason that they are not going to explain to you on other live streams, other independent media, definitely not mainstream media. The reason America bends over and bends over and bends over to Saudi Arabia is because of the petrodollar. The agreement between Saudi Arabia and America that OPEC will sell and buy oil in dollars makes the dollar powerful, which makes the dollar keep its value. Obviously, you guys have seen a lot of inflation, but not the extent you would see if we didn't have the petro-based dollar. And so, therefore, the U.S. can print as much money as we want, $1 trillion a year to the Pentagon, $21 trillion in unaccounted for adjustments at the Pentagon over the past 15 to 20 years, can print as much money as they want, and the dollar doesn't lose most of its value. So that only happens because the dollar, the American dollar, is the petrodollar. It's the reserve currency of the world. And that is, and so the agreement with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia, what did they get out of the agreement? They get the endless backing of the United States military, largest military in the world, obviously military bases around the world, 900 roughly around the world. Meanwhile, how many does China have outside of China? One.
And it's like right on the border too, isn't it?
I thought it was
like, like kind of like.
I thought it was maybe in Africa, but anyway, I could be wrong. But so Saudi Arabia gets that, but that relationship is a bit rocky. Things are getting rockier. The dollar's losing its power to some degree. And obviously, to ever get past the climate crisis, we must get past the petrodollar immediately. Like, the U.S. dollar cannot be based on petroleum, or else the U.S., the largest empire the world has ever known, will do anything it can to make sure petroleum continues to be used every day, all day, for everything. So there's a little bit extra of why we are so fawning, why we are so in the debt of Saudi Arabia and will go to the extent of protecting a known murderer and, also causing the genocide in Yemen. So I don't want to act like Khashoggi's the only one they've murdered, but anyway.
Well, right. But as you said, it's a link to something that the
U.S.
government has cared about, which is the corporate media. I mean,
right.
Like it's like if some guy
normally
from CNN got fucking offed, then you'd think that the U.S. government would care, because those are their people, right? Those are the people that carry on their bullshit imperialist agenda. So you'd think that they'd care, which we've already established since long ago that the U.S. gives no shits about Yemen.
And if it were, you're right. If this same thing had happened by a country that not only, obviously, one that we're enemies with. So, if fucking North Korea or Iran had actually had a journalist chopped up, we would have, God knows what would have happened. But also with our allies that don't have as much power over us as Saudi Arabia does. So if you, fucking Belgium had chopped up a journalist or some shit, I think you'd see something pretty serious that's not on the level of like, funny you did that. Okay, let's move on. What new topic? How about them Miami Dolphins recently?
Yeah, that's and somebody mentioned that they're still waiting for 9/11 justice. Yeah, and that was another aspect. Of course, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has been shielded incredibly well from any kind of link to 9/11, even though they are, can I say balls deep? Up to their necks.
Do you mean, am I going to bleep you out?
No, I just meant I don't know. Does that feel right, or is it up to their necks? I don't know. I'm workshopping that one.
How about up to the necks of their balls? Up to their balls necks?
Is that a thing? is that a thing that you guys talk about? Do they have?
No, I was telling one of those jokey jokes.
Okay.
Sometimes I've been known to do that.
I don't know what you guys do in the fucking locker rooms or whatever it is that I don't know.
We talk a lot about our balls necks. Yeah.
Well,
Okay, so next story. God, there's a lot of death in this episode. We actually have good news coming up a little later, but
Well, this is a call to action, if you will. So, stay tuned. Get a pen and paper.
I like a good call to action.
Yes, and
You have to lean towards me a little
why?
because you were out of the screen for a second.
Oh, well, I gotta read. And Lee has a bit of a story time that he can add to this story.
Story time. Thanks for making it seem like I'm going to do something adorable in a minute.
Okay, where am I? Okay, so this is actually happening in 10 days. If I don't know when you guys are listening to this, but it is November 19th as we're recording this. And the supposed execution of 37-year-old Kevin Johnson in Missouri is slated for November 29th, and we will share the information how you can call and push to stop his death. But basically, what the Kevin Johnson story is a story that could be, again, copy and pasted throughout the country. But basically, he's been in prison since he was 19. He for killing a cop. And though he does admit that he killed this cop, it was after the cops raided his house and murdered his kid brother, who was 12 years old. And he has a daughter and a grandchild now as well. And this article that for those of you watching, you can see on Truth Out. For those of you listening, it's a Truth Out article that is an interview with Kevin Johnson, who goes through what happened that day, explaining, the turn of events and what happened, and also pointing out what happened with the trial. That it was, I believe, where was it? Hold on. Da, 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 da. Okay, so there was a hung jury in Johnson's first trial who rejected the first-degree murder charge and felt that it should be a second-degree murder charge based on his past and the fact that he watched his 12-year-old baby brother collapse and die during a police house search. And then in his second trial, it was an all-white jury. The prosecutor eliminated potential black jurors, and this was okay, apparently. And he was sentenced to death for killing the white police officer. And I know that you've had in your act and in your reports before these statistics about, it's not about the race of.
It's the number one determinant of whether someone gets the death penalty in very similar, basically equivalent cases is a lot of people would go, oh, it's not racist. A lot of white people are executed, but actually it's racist in a way a lot of people don't understand. It's the race of the victim is the number one decider. So if you kill a white person, that is something that American society treats as very serious. You need to die. If you kill a black person or Hispanic person or an Asian person, we apparently, according to statistics, view that as far less of a crime.
Right. And so basically his defense, his team is basically trying to highlight that. I mean, first of all, he was 19 years old. He had just seen his 12-year-old brother collapse and die during a police house search. He grew up under impoverished and traumatic conditions of child neglect and child abuse. His advocates assert that racist prosecutorial conduct and ineffective counsel impacted his defense, and that court-appointed attorneys failed to present mitigating evidence to the jury. Again, very common stories that you see all across the country, particularly in the case of Black and poor defendants, that the context of the crime is not interesting. It's not brought up. And if there is an instance where there seems to be jurors, particularly somebody pointed out in the stream, a jury of your peers, if there seem to be people on the jury that are sympathetic to you, they can be shown the fucking door and they can get in a new jury that will see things the prosecutor's way, and before you know it, you're on death row. And this is an important thing to because I think sometimes, we talk a lot about how the justice system is totally unjust, but there are a lot of tactics that can work in this, and one of them is this jury and the idea of, for instance, keeping Black jurors off the jury. We talked about this in the Mumio Abu Jamal case as well.
Yep.
A couple of weeks ago. And that's a very convenient tactic, right? We want to make sure, the prosecution wants to make sure that there is nobody on that jury that could possibly see things from your point of view.
Yeah.
Oh, we want to make sure that nobody on that jury knows what it's like to grow up impoverished, Black, in these awful conditions with abuse and neglect. Like, we want to make sure that that's the case, so we can make this person look not just evil, but not human. And I actually spoke to a lawyer not that long ago who does a lot of defense work and pro bono defense work, particularly in the South, predominantly with Black defendants. And he said that this is one of the hurdles that they deal with the most, which is trying to just get people to see their clients as fucking human beings.
Yeah.
And
if I can just throw one thing in here. So, like you're saying, an impoverished Black person facing death penalty charges for killing a cop, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're appointed a lawyer. And especially in smaller towns, but this happens throughout America, that lawyer may be somewhat trying to get them off. It doesn't, I'm not saying the lawyer, they're generally appointed someone that legit would like to get them off. However, that lawyer also, especially in smaller towns, goes up in front of that judge endlessly, hundreds of times, maybe hundreds of times a year. And so that judge will look down upon them and hold it against them if they're viewed as, quote, wasting the court's time. So that lawyer may go up and say, look, here's why my guy shouldn't be executed, blah, blah, blah. He should get life in prison instead. But he's not really going to spend that much time on a poor person that is facing death penalty for killing a cop in front of a judge that will take that out on him later in other cases. So you often have a public defender who's way overworked, views this as a lost cause, and maybe trying to help people. Again, yes, there are some public defenders that are fucking awful, but maybe trying to help people, but still is incapable or unwilling to actually do the work of freeing this person.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a completely broken system. And so the next thing that I want to share with y'all is the information about how you could actually help. And they're asking folks to call. Do you have that other thing that I sent you? It's like a JPEG.
Sorry, give me a second.
So basically the state of Missouri plans to execute Kevin Johnson on November 29th. And so his advocates are asking for people to call the office of the governor, Mike Parson. And while we share that screen, I thought it would be cool because I think some people who listen to our show or ever hear me talk about things like have told people, don't fucking sign a petition, don't But this is different. And I think it's important to note why this is different, because this does actually work. Like, people have been moved off of death row because people call. And Lee, would you like to share a personal story about this particular topic?
I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, I don't want to overstate my importance. There was a group of activists also working to try and save a certain man's life. This was many years ago, 12 to 15. I don't remember exactly, but I heard about this story, and it was not really a national story. There was some independent coverage of it. But it was in Texas, a man named Kenneth Foster was going to be executed. And here's how his case was different than everyone you've ever heard on death row. The prosecution, everyone, so the state, the prosecution, the defense, everyone admitted he had not killed anyone and he was going to be executed because he'd been driving a car. His friend got out, got in a fight with someone, ended up murdering him, and they were putting the driver who didn't know this was going to happen to death. And in Texas, they have a law called what they call a law of parties. If you're with someone who murders someone, we can execute you because Texas loves executing people. So so this was in Texas. The governor at the time was Rick Perry. You probably know him because he ran for president and looked like a fucking idiot. But he loved executing people. He executed more people than George W. Bush did when he was Texas governor. So this guy loves executing people, doesn't give a fuck about innocence. But what they do give a fuck about, and that's why these calls can matter, they give a fuck about how they look in the media, how they look if they're going to run for higher office later, those type of things. And so these are politicians, and they care about how they look if a lot of people are talking about it. And so I was more naive about the system back then. Well, I guess it was probably over 15 years, but at least 15 years ago. But I was more naive about the system back then. And I called the number they gave to tell the governor not to execute Kenneth Foster. And I get his secretary, and she says, okay, we'll add you to the tally, and hangs up on me. And I am blown away that there is and she sounds, bored by it. I am blown away that there's a tally on whether to have someone murdered. She's just like, yeah, like it's American Idol or something. Yeah, but okay.
That's your vote? Okay.
One for not murder. And so I'm thinking, how can I have more of an impact? I'm nowhere near Texas. I'm in New York City. I'm not in Texas. I can't get there easily. I can't be in the governor's driveway as other protesters were. So I do not want to understate how much other protesters and activists did. And so I was like, how can I have more impact? So I was like, well, let's make them think I'm more important than I am. And I called the next day. So, not immediately after, but I called the next day. And I had a whole story about how I was a filmmaker. I was making a film. I made up a fake production company that sounded real. I combined two names, Dreamscape Films or something. And I said, we're making a documentary, full-length documentary. We already have distribution on the death of Kenneth Foster. He hadn't died yet, by the way, on the execution of Kenneth Foster. And I was wondering if we can interview the governor. And she goes, well, I got to put you through to the press secretary. Clearly believed my story. She puts me to the press secretary. I tell her the whole story again. She says, well, I don't know. I'll need to consult with the governor. How can I reach you? And, after I talk to him. And I go, well, the email for the movie will be up soon. It's info@bloodontexashands.com. And there's a long pause, and then she clarifies the spelling of the email address. And so I get off the phone with her, and I could tell she was being sincere, and I could tell she was sincerely worried that this film was going to be made on the death of Kenneth Foster. And so I kind of have no doubt that she brought it to the governor. Now, again, there were other protesters. There were other famous people. I believe Jimmy Carter maybe had spoken out against that death penalty. And ultimately, Rick Perry commuted the sentence. Kenneth Foster, I believe, is alive to this day still. And it made me realize that a few people, not one person, but a few people can have an impact if you do it in the right way, use the right leverage. Rick Perry at the time was planning a presidential run and was probably scared of a bad movie coming out about him. And that's what it comes down to, is how can you have an impact greater than you as just a single person might be able to have? And so anyway, I highly recommend you call this number. If you happen to pretend to be a film crew or something like that, I'm not saying do it. I'm not saying do it, but I'm not saying don't do it.
So for those of you listening, call the Missouri Governor Mike Parson, 573-751-3222. And you can also look up hashtag clemency for KJ on Twitter. There's been a lot of traffic on that hashtag, so you can look for more information there. But again, there's just one example of why this particular action can mean a lot and can do a lot. And so please take a moment out of your day.
All right, moving on.
I also tweeted the phone number. So if you're in the middle
what's
of
your
something,
Twitter?
At Radical Eleanor.
Radical Eleanor is the Twitter account with that number as well. So moving on to a story you probably saw in the mainstream media, that Russia bombed Poland, which is a NATO member, and 2 people died. And what you probably have heard or might know is that if someone attacks a NATO member, that means all of NATO gets involved. It's instant war in a large scale.
Have we done this before?
What's that?
This whole, if one person gets attacked, then everybody has to join in. Has this happened before? I
believe it was World War. Was it 1? I think. Yeah. Was it the first time the whole world tried to kill each other?
See, this is the problem when you do this. I mean, I'm gonna let you get into the story in a second.
Should we talk about the story? No.
We should talk about the story, but it's like, NATO is dumb for so many reasons, but this is one of the many reasons that it's fucking dumb. Somebody trips over a cable and accidentally like bombs somewhere, or presses a button, or happens to put in the code on their phone when they're trying to butt dial someone, and all of a sudden it's a world war because you've created a conglomerate of people who are itching with their trigger fingers ready. They're just itching for a war. And you've created the perfect situation to just like all out global annihilation. Over to you.
So, and some of you might have been like, this seems too easy, right? Would Russia really like, you don't have to support Russia's invasion. You don't have to support the proxy war in Ukraine in any way to be like, this seems something a little weird about this. And sure enough, here's the update. Zelensky and media lackeys caught in most dangerous lie yet. Here's the image of the AP headline: Russian missiles cross into Poland during strike in Ukraine.
Cross into Poland? It sounds like they were like walking. Like cross into Poland. That is such a bullshit headline.
Well, I think they were trying to say that Russia didn't do it intentionally, that they accidentally bombed Poland. But still, either way, it still could lead to world war. It could lead to a nuclear Armageddon. It could lead to the death of all of us.
That sounds like something they'd write about Israel. Israeli rockets cross into Gaza.
It would be like people were found dead near rocket. Maybe Israeli.
Why.
Yeah. So, but here's and by the way, for those of you that don't know of the Gray Zone, great outlet, but you're like, hey, he's quoting from outlets I don't know. This is actually verified by Biden and others. So even Biden and them are admitting this. With Kyiv exposed for a lie that could have triggered Third World War, it is time to examine past deceptions that Western media promoted. A missile that exploded on Polish soil on November 15th killed two civilians and destroyed farm equipment. That's the biggest problem. Ukrainian President Zelensky and Western corporate media rushed to blame the explosion on Russia in apparent hopes of triggering NATO's Article 5, which requires NATO states to defend one another militarily when attacked by a hostile force. Polish and NATO members, including President Joseph Biden, have since confirmed the missile that struck Poland was in fact a Ukrainian S-300 anti-aircraft missile. Yeah, so this
Aren't we lucky that they use different missiles?
I know, honestly. But so even the U.S. is admitting this. Yet Zelensky is sticking to his line, blaming Russia for the strike, while NATO Secretary General
Jens Stoltenberg.
Yeah, you do that. Wait, isn't it Stoltenberg?
Well, I'm trying to Americanify it for you, okay?
I believe it's American Eyes.
What Americanify? All right.
Well, why can't I Americanify Jens then?
Oh, because every time you do that, my ovaries gag.
Don't know why it had to be your ovaries, but
Because it's a
still,
very sensitive part of my body. It's Jens.
okay.
Thank you.
Jens, I'm saying it better than you. Jens Stoltenberg still insists that Russia bears ultimate responsibility.
You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of that line from Maverick, the movie, where he says, and I know, what's his face? The actor.
Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson is a douche canoe, but this line was funny. He's talking about these like Native Americans come over a hill or something, and he's talking to some other actor, and he's like, "Well, I feel like it's their fault for being on our land before we got here." That's what this feels like.
Right.
Russia is responsible. Why? Well, because they were the reason that the Ukrainians bombed Poland. So it's really.
Which, by the way, weirdly, that scene was also about a Russian oligarch coming over to shoot Native Americans.
Oh my God, that's so true.
But that's not what you were referencing.
No, but that was like an OG.
That was an OG
Anti-Russia.
anti-Russia. Yep. Meanwhile, the media outlets that reflexively pointed the finger at Russia have been forced to take a step back from their initial reporting. Russian missiles hit Poland, the territory of our friendly country. People died, Zelensky insisted on November 15th. The longer Russia, this is a continued quote from Zelensky, the longer Russia feels impunity, the more threats there will be to anyone within reach of Russian missiles to fire missiles at NATO territory. This is a Russian missile attack on collective security. This is a very significant escalation. We must act. He's like trying to get World War III triggered. Zelensky held firm the following day, despite mounting evidence that his own country's air defenses were responsible, declaring, "I have no doubt that this is not our missile. I believe that this was a Russian missile based on our military reports." By this time, most analysts, end quote, by the way, by this time, most analysts rejected the Ukrainian president's assessment, including the founder of the U.S. government-sponsored intelligence cutout Bellingcat. For those of you who have ever heard of Bellingcat report or tweet or anything, it is the most pro-U.S., U.S. empire. It's just like straight CIA garbage. And even the founder said, at this point, I think it's fair anyone saying that a Russian missile hit Poland based on the current evidence is being irresponsible. A Russian attack on a NATO member, Poland, could have triggered Article 5 of the NATO's compact, which compels its members to consider an attack against one ally to be an attack against all allies. Such a mobilization would have amounted to World War III. And as you were saying, it's insane for alliances to spiral out of control like that. But for those of you who saw this, and my biggest point on this is the mainstream media, like they will do tons of coverage when they think it's a Russian missile hitting Poland. But then when they find out that it's not, they'll do a little, maybe, if you're lucky, a little bit of coverage about how it was a Ukrainian missile, and that's it.
Or they'll do a retraction on page like 25.
Yeah. So most people walk away from a story like this thinking Russia bombed Poland, no matter what, even if the mainstream media admits it later.
Yeah. The damage is already done.
Yeah. And so, yet again, we see our horrific mainstream media. We see these bullshit lies. We see the parade of propaganda that's fucking hurled at us, to mix my metaphors. And it's like every time I hear a story like this, I go, we'll find out in a day or two this isn't true.
I'd say, and then somebody sent me a story about Iran executing 15,000 people, which is a lie, by the way. But I wrote
which mainstream media has also admitted was
a lie.
Fake.
And I just wrote to him. I was like, anything that has to do with Iran or Venezuela or Russia or Cuba, or just fucking don't believe it if it's US media. Just don't. Like US corporate media. Because it is just the amount of bullshit that is just pouring out of these outlets when it comes to the enemies of the state, which are predominantly people that have never actually done anything to us personally, like as a nation or as a people. It's just it's remarkable. So our media literacy is important in general, but it is very important, particularly with these nations. So yeah, don't believe it.
Okay, so we are headed to rumble.com/Lee Camp. We're already streaming live there. So if you're watching there, nothing will change. It's completely free to continue watching there. Please join us there. The only way we keep this show and other work going is at leecamp.net. I hope you'll become a member and join there. You get all kinds of exclusive stuff. You get exclusive Q&A with me every Friday. You get all kinds of great shit. So I hope you'll check out leecamp.net. But if you're enjoying this, we got at least 2 more stories for you. I'm also going to show you the new episode of Most Censored News. So that will be played as well. So join us, rumble.com/Lee Camp, and we will keep going right there, right now.
Right here, right now.
Would you like to start on this story?
Sure. This
largest
is
dam
a
removal.
good news story. So, yay.
Yay. We need one.
So a big congrats to